Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this presentation on emotional health and growth for elementary. I actually did this exact same presentation earlier today on for the high school. And so this is very much fresh in my mind. Um, for those, I don't know if there's people that have joined this morning and are here again this afternoon. If that's the case, I would suggest, because the first two sections will be actually quite similar, it might be a bit repetitive for you. And so obviously you're welcome to stay, but just to keep in mind that the presentation might be very similar. We will be covering three different sections for today's presentation. The first section is going to be on making sense of emotion. I see the value in every presentation that I do to start by the beginning, to setting the stage, talking about the fundamentals, and then from there we build. And so the first part will be about making sense of emotion. Then the second part, we're going to compare the difference between social and emotional learning and nurturing health, emotional health and growth. And so they're not the same. I will take the time to walk that through with you. And then the third part, we are going to look at through the pyramid of intervention, how can we support, nurture emotional health and growth through tier 1 best practices, tier 2 targeted, and tier 3 individualized practices. And so we've got a bit of a journey here. It's about a 2-hour presentation. So I ask you if you've got any questions to put them in the chat. And after I'm done with the recording, I will take the time to answer questions at that point. Okay, so making sense of emotion. The material I'll be presenting today is actually a section out of the course from the Neufeld Institute called The Science of Emotion. And so I'm covering, it was a 5-hour course. I'm not doing it justice. I'm really kind of overviewing it in this first part. And so what are the key things that we must know about emotions? First of all, emotions and feelings are not the same. Sometimes we use these almost synonymously or interchangeably at times, and we're not meant to use them as the same meaning. They're actually not the same thing. So emotions is more of a primitive part of the continuum, and it is not conscious. And so emotions, as our brain is the one that kind of sets off the sequencing, emotions is what push us to act. And so when we're thinking, for example, of the flight, fight, freeze response, these are emotions that are pushing us in in that direction. So they're not conscious. Whereas feelings is a more sophisticated part of the sequencing. It's within the thinking part of the brain, and it requires consciousness. This is attached to words. And so to be able to name your emotions, this is what a feeling is. So you're able to recognize, to notice, to match it to a word, to be able to describe what it is that you are experiencing. So that's a difference between a feeling and an emotion. Now, although, if we can allow ourselves to feel our emotions, not all emotions are felt vulnerably. The role of defenses is there to protect us, to protect the brain from wounding and overwhelm. And so depending on the emotion in itself, if it is overwhelming or too intense or quite wounding, our brain may have the reflex to shut it down. And it doesn't mean that we don't have the emotion, we just don't have the feeling, the recognition of that emotion. And so it remains in an unconscious physiological or chemistry level at that point. Of course, emotions, as you know, I mean, for yourself, for your kids, for the students that you work with, can be quite messy, can be noisy, can be chaotic. But although they may make us feel uncomfortable or may make others feel uncomfortable, it is not a dysfunction. It is actually quite adaptive, and the brain has its reasons. And so even if we can't make sense of it, it doesn't feel reasonable in that moment, it doesn't mean that the brain doesn't have its reasons as to why we are moved in one direction or the other. Oftentimes, the bottom line of a reason why the brain may act a certain way is for survival purposes. Emotional self-control, you may use the word self-regulation, and so sometimes I will use different terms. Self-control is not the absence of emotion. Actually, in order to control your emotion, you need two emotions to be able to neutralize each other. And so we're going to talk about that further into the presentation. But the key to self-control, to self-regulation, is not to suppress or to remove an emotion. It is to find the counterpart to be able to balance it. And we'll talk about that later on. Another point is that emotions themselves are not the problem. As I mentioned 2 points earlier, the brain has its reasons, if not, simply for survival purposes, but these emotions are actually quite adaptive and needed. And so the emotion itself is not the problem. Where the problem may lie is the emotion can push us to problem behavior, but the emotion at the foundation itself is not a problem. It is actually attempting to solve the problem. And so when defenses come on and then the emotions are not able to solve the problem properly, this is where problems arise. And we'll talk about that a bit later. And the last point on this slide is that emotions follow three different laws. The first law is that emotions need to move. And so similarly to an electrical charge, when we are charged in our brain for survival purposes or other, there needs to be a discharge where there is a charge. And so the emotion will look to move and to find a way out. And so through releasing and expression is the way through. So that's law number one. Law number two is that emotions require to be felt in order to fulfill their potentials. And so I mentioned here that feelings and emotions are not the same thing. And so an emotion needs to become a feeling in order to allow for the job that it's meant to do to accomplish itself. But you can only do this if you can feel your emotions. And the third law is that emotions will aim for balance, but only, however, if we are developmentally ready. And so our little ones, or ones that are perhaps older but stuck developmentally, may not have the ability to balance their emotions properly because of the lack of requirements for that. And we'll talk about that a bit later in the presentation. But at the foundation of things, emotions aim to try to balance. And so it is not in our nature for emotions to stay into the one category. There really is, as we mature and grow and have the capacity, all of the different potential unfolds. By nature, we get to this place of needing to balance things out. And this is meant to be done naturally. It's in our design. We are not meant to teach this. This is something that happens to us if everything unfolds properly. So I want to walk through each of the different three laws of emotion. So the first law of emotion, as I mentioned, is that emotions seek to move. That once the brain is activated, that it is charged emotionally, it seeks for a way out. It seeks for a discharge. And so as you notice, the movement, this is the highs and the low of the emotion as it completes its loop. And so there's a need for us to express our emotions. Emotions are actually there for us to preserve our healthy functioning and well-being. At the foundation of that, it's survival, but well-being and our functioning is also part of the design of our emotions. And so just to look at it from a physiological perspective, the emotion part of our brain is the limbic system. And the limbic system is divided into different sections. The two main that I'm going to name today is the amygdala and the hypothalamus. And so the amygdala is kind of like a smoke detector. And this is what is activated at first when the brain has picked up, for example, a sense of danger in the environment. And so once the brain has picked up a sense of danger, the amygdala is triggered. And then the amygdala will send a signal to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus, through the sympathetic nervous system, will orchestrate all of the cortisol, the adrenaline, and all of that for the body to react. And so that is the whole sequencing of the brain to the body. And so I mentioned that emotions have a purpose, have a job to do. So the immediate task of emotion is survival. And so when we're talking about the stress response, talking about the flight, fight, freeze response, this is the most fundamental purpose of emotions, is to move us to safety. And the ultimate job of emotion is for us to grow up. And so, a lot of previous literature talked a lot about the role of cognition in the to allow for the individual to grow up, to mature. And we've only recognized, in the more recent years, through especially thanks to neuroscience, that emotions have a much central role than we thought. And emotion is part of, front and center for our capacity to grow up. And I will talk about that in part two, in the way in which our emotions grow us up. But for now, I'm going to leave it here. The unfortunate part about emotions is, although they have a job to do and they're very needed and necessary, they can become quite messy, chaotic, noisy. They may come across as unacceptable in our society, can be quite alienating, can be wounding. And all of that can have an impact on relationship. And because attachment is our most preeminent need, it is also our biggest threat. And so if the child were to pick up in their day-to-day that their emotions get in the way of relationship, and can cause issues to the relationship, can alienate the other person, then the brain will defend itself situationally for survival purposes within protecting attachment. So the brain, in reaction, will suppress or depress emotions to protect attachments, especially if emotional expression is considered to be unacceptable. And so if the child were to pick up in their environment that some emotions are not welcome, that there's not room for those emotions, the expression of those emotions, because they're messy and chaotic. If they have perception that, kind of like this cookie cutter around certain emotions, that what is in the middle of it is what is invited and welcome, and that the rest that is around is frowned upon, then the brain will move to defend, will move to temporarily suppress and depress emotions to preserve attachment. And so this may be not even that the adults have said that it is unacceptable, certain emotions. Sometimes kids, in the adult's energy and their distress vis-a-vis the child's upset, they may interpret that this is not welcome, not because the adult said so, but just because it felt like as if it wasn't. The other thing that may impact as well for the brain to defend is in the way in which we address emotions. Sometimes we're well-meaning as adults, but unfortunately our interventions can cause more harm than good. And so the example of the image here is the natural course of emotion, where a child might be upset at first, and if we let the upset run its course, it will move to adaptation if the softness is there, and eventually will bounce back and recovery will ensue. But if we as adults are focused on the cognition of things, of the rational part of things, or trying to work against the nature of emotion and trying to prematurely put out the upset to bring to calm, if we're trying to confront the irrationality, trying to shut down the impulse of the child, focusing on just being positive, pursuing happiness at all costs, that we focus on self-regulation prematurely, that we pursue calmness and tranquility when the child's not at that place just yet because they're still in their upset. All of this, what we call right thinking, causes an issue in terms of the natural course of the way emotions are meant to unfold, and it works against emotions. And when kids get the message that we're not meant to express those emotions, then what will happen, as I mentioned before, is that the emotion will become suppressed or depressed. However, law number one is that emotions must move. Emotions must find an out, must be released. And so even if temporarily we are able to suppress the emotions, it's only a matter of time before then the emotions start taking tangents and will now start to come out left, right, and center. And so what happens when emotions are suppressed is that it will come out in challenging behaviors. And so emotions need to be released and expressed not just because we don't want them to come out inappropriately because of the accumulation and the explosion of it, or the tangents that they may take, but also for well-being and mental health purposes. One of the books that I really appreciate from Mark Brackett that is called Permission to Feel. In that book, I'll read the following quote from it. The irony is that when we ignore our feelings or suppress them, they only become stronger. The really powerful emotions build up inside us like a dark force that inevitably poisons everything we do, whether we like it or not. Hurt feelings don't vanish on their own. They don't heal themselves. If we don't express our emotions, they pile up like a debt that will eventually come due. Research has shown that there are many, many consequences of suppressing emotions, consequences on physical health, mental health, general well-being. And this includes problems of attention, problems of concentration, memory problems, high daily emotional stress and emotional dysregulation, because we're not allowing for emotions to run their course, or they accumulate, and then emotions can destabilize and become dysregulated. It can impact social functioning. We've seen increase in physical aggression and bullying incidences. Mental health conditions have increased, including anxiety and depression, and long-term health problems on the body as well, including, and this is not an exhaustive list, of insomnia, poor digestion, etc. And so all of these different elements have been shown through research that when emotions are suppressed, long enough, for a long period enough, that this can have all of these different impacts. And it's, I mean, if you look at the list, unbelievable how this can take a toll on our body and mind. And so what is needed here for our mental health, and there's more literature nowadays on this, is the capacity to bounce back from stress and from adversity, which is what we call resilience. Resilience is the key to nurturing emotional health and growth. To allow for the person to face adversity. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but that they're able to bounce back from it and remain well in terms of their being. There are three keys to allow for resilience to unfold. And one of the three keys, which fits right into the laws of emotion, is allow for emotional expression. We'll talk about the other two a bit later, but I just wanted to reiterate, you can see the different literatures that kind of intertwine with each other and reinforce with each other. And so the need for emotional expression. And by the way, emotional expression doesn't just mean talking about our emotions. Words can be part of it, yes, but many don't have the words. Many, in different circumstances, need to let it out in a different way, whether through physical exertion, whether through an art medium or whatnot. Emotional expression can take many, many different shapes and forms. It is not necessarily just about talking and using words. The steps to emotional health and maturity starts with expressing our emotions. Oftentimes in the programs that we use through social emotional learning, we're very much focused on self-regulation and about reflection on our emotions. The word mixing here is Gordon Neufeld's way of saying the same thing as self-regulation. And I'll explain later why he uses the word mixing. There's a reason why he uses this word instead. And so self-regulation and reflection on emotions or on our behavior are the last two steps. All of these 5 steps are meant to be done sequentially. And so if you cannot express those emotions, if you don't have the words to name, or I'm saying words, but it could be symbols or images to describe what it is that you're feeling. If you're not able to feel those emotions because you have defenses, there is no way in hell that you will be able to regulate those emotions and reflect on them without these 3 first steps. And so our job is to make space, invite, make space for them to let it out. whether it's through venting, whether it's to sharing their frustrations and their sadness and their disappointment and their fears and so forth. Of course, there's a time and place for these things. Of course, we are meant to establish safety. If the emotion comes out in a very foul way and it is unsafe, it's our job to put on the structures and boundaries and to make sure that things are safe. I am not saying that we should let kids let out their emotions at any time, any place. What I am saying is that we need to organize in a day, in a week, time and space safely through it within structure and boundaries for the kids, the students to be able to let out those emotions with or without words. Tears is also part of that expression, but not all our kids are able to get to their tears. And by the way, there are different types of tears. When we cut an onion and we tear to the fumes of the onion, the composition of those tears are very different than the composition of tears when we are laughing to the point of tears, or tears of pure frustration. The tears that I want to bring your attention to are those deep, deep tears of sadness, of sorrow, of grief. Those tears actually have a composition of toxins. And in those types of toxins, for example, are stress hormones like cortisol and mood regulating hormones like oxytocin. And so this is why after we have a really good cry, that we have a sense of relief. But we need to allow ourselves to get to that place of deep sorrow. And how often I will see kids with tears, but they're not true deep tears. Oftentimes they're tears of frustration more than anything else. And those tears are not therapeutic in the same way as those deep tears. Not that I'm saying that we should make kids cry, but can we make a space that when they do find their tears, that we allow for them to let those tears come out? And of course, as not all kids feel comfortable crying. Many of them feel quite uncomfortable crying, whether it's because, in their upbringing, they got the message directly or indirectly that tears were not invited, were not welcome, that they were a sign of weakness. Some kids genuinely have a physiological discomfort with tears, especially when you hold them in for such a long, long time, that sometimes, the pain that you get in the holding back of the tears in the throat and in the stomach and so forth, all of that has an impact. And so for those kids, play is the way through. Being able to bring them in the play mode that is not for real, that they may cry to a story about a character, the story of a character, or that they're playing a character and that they're pretending to cry. All of that has a very therapeutic experience, even if it's not crying for our own sadness, our own emotions. The brain doesn't know the difference when we cry to ourselves versus when we cry for something in the play mode. There was studies that have shown that adding theater program in the prison system, that the prisoners actually had much more emotional health following the possibility, the experiences of doing drama, of doing play theater, playing roles of characters that are sad, that are angry, and being able to let out, express those emotions, even if it wasn't their own. And so the beauty of play is that it is meant to safeguard, because it's not for real. There are not true repercussions, and they are quite engaging. It's not meant to make you work. It is meant to be exploratory and expressive. It is not for real, and it allows for us freely to express whatever it is that is within us. And so what play has to offer emotions is a work-free space for development to take place, a protection for those feelings that wouldn't otherwise come out, an expression without repercussions, without consequences, because it's not for real, so there aren't true repercussions. Now, studies have shown that play-deprived rats, so we did this with animals. Remember that the way animals play, the way that rats play is through play fighting, through pouncing on each other. And so studies have attempted to deprive rats from play, and they have found that those rats that were deprived of play had impaired abilities under novel situations, situations that changed, or challenging situations. They didn't adapt as well compared to rats that were not deprived from play. They also found that rats, that were deprived of play were more aggressive when they were in a pouncing play fight type situation because they didn't have the experiences before, that it encouraged more injury, and that it took more time for that rat to assume the submissive posture, and showed inappropriate exploration of the resident's territory after defeat. And so we can see that if for the rats this is very much true to take away play, how can this be true for our kids as well? The same studies, or excuse me, different studies have shown that play deprived animals have also displayed increase in levels of anxiety. And so if we think about our kids, David Elkind, who wrote the book Power of Play, has mentioned in his book that over the past 2 decades, children have lost 12 hours of free time a week, including 8 hours of unstructured play and outdoor activity. And so if the consequences are so true with the rats, I can't even imagine with our kids. Stuart Brown in the Encyclopedia of Play Science mentioned that outdoor play has decreased by 71% in one generation in both the US and the UK. And Peter Gray, back in 2011, so this is a while ago, mentioned that escalating diagnosis of childhood anxiety, depression, and ADHD has paralleled the loss of play. And so, oh my goodness, the impact that this has on our kids. And so this ties right back to this slide that I mentioned earlier, about the evidence of when there is suppressing emotion, all of the consequences that this brings to our children. And so the solution is here. Can we make space for play? Can we invite it? Can we set time for it, space for it, materials for it? When children are stirred up emotionally, they can play, their play, can reflect themes that they are struggling with. Play is how they naturally make sense of all of the emotions they are experiencing. In play, pictures are drawn, structures are made, and games are engaged into that allows for emotions to come out safely. Especially for those kids that cannot talk about their emotions. And so, oftentimes, um, the SCL programs where we focus on words, where we teach these different skills, these work for the kids that don't need it because it unfolds naturally. It's those kids for whom that have the defenses, that have a hard time to find the words, that are not able to have a connection, body and mind. Those are the ones that need that extra support, and play is so central for those kids. The second law of emotion, as I mentioned earlier, is that they seek to be felt, and it is only when they are felt that they're able to fulfill their potential. And so, for example, sadness cannot lead to healing and recovery, which is the ultimate job, without being felt. And so each emotion has a job. Alarm, for example, is meant to move us to caution for survival purposes. Frustration, for example, is there to move us to effect change when something's not working for us. And so each job has a purpose, but this purpose cannot be fulfilled if we're not able to feel those emotions. And also, in order for those emotions to be managed, emotions require to be felt in order for that management to happen. And so, for example, if I were to have the impulse to attack, the only way to manage that attack is to have feelings of caring and responsibility. And it's the combination of the two that will neutralize the impact, the impulse to attack. And so this is what we call emotion management. It is the mixing of these two emotions that neutralize each other. But emotions can only be felt if it is safe and if there is space for those emotions to be felt. And so a quote out of Hannah Beach's article. Hannah Beach is the author of Reclaiming Our Students. She also wrote this article called Kids Need a Safe Space to Feel. So in her article, she writes, our kids are experiencing an emotional crisis. Children are more anxious, aggressive, and shut down than ever. We are seeing clear evidence of this in our schools, our homes, our neighborhoods, and our community spaces. The situation has become so dire that our newspapers are literally writing stories about elementary school age children punching, kicking, and biting their teachers. The root cause of the emotional crisis and resulting behavioral issues we see on a day-to-day is that children are losing their feelings. And so why are they losing their feelings? What has changed? Why is it that there's an increase nowadays? I mean, of course, behavior has always happened in our schools. There has been aggression, there has been bullying, there has been alarm and anxiety and so forth. But why there's an explosion? And there really is. Studies have shown that there's been an explosion of behavior and mental health issues with our kids. Why are our kids losing their feelings? I actually attended a conference a week or so ago from the Neufeld Institute, and Gordon Neufeld walked through what is happening with our kids today. And some of what he mentioned, I'm going to be mentioning here in this slide. First of all, there's a huge society pressure for the adults to push kids towards independence and for self-control, for self-regulation prematurely. And unfortunately, when we do this, when we push and pull for a fruit before they are developmentally ready, what happens is that kids then don't feel safe and don't feel taken care of. And so this has a true repercussion on our kids. The impact of peer orientation, what I mean by that is when peers are connected to each other and have left the adults out of the loop, we see more and more peers that are oriented towards other kids and that are not oriented towards the adults. And so the adults cannot shield those kids that they don't have a relationship with. And of course, kids are not meant to take care of kids. Kids are primitive. Kids are not social or not civilized in the same way as adults are. And so they are at risk for more wounding in their interaction. The impact of screens, digital devices, social media. Oh my goodness, has this added a whole other layer of wounding for our kids, because not only are kids not as civilized as adults, but on the screen in social media, where you're not facing somebody eye to eye when you're talking to them, it is much easier to say wounding things, to peer pressure and bullying and so forth on these different platforms. And so first of all, there's more wounding that can happen, but also our kids are less and less deeply connected. The thing about social media is that you only connect through proximity or through sameness. There isn't a deep attachment that is developing there. And so it is quite dangerous in terms of protecting our kids from adversity. The loss of respite, the fact that our kids don't get downtime, they don't have time for creative solitude. When they're alone, they're bored. They are uncomfortable with boredom. They don't have creativity that comes to them. They don't have time for rest without external stimulation. And so all of that takes a toll on the body, on the system. I mentioned it already, the loss of play, the loss of being outdoors, all of that has an impact as well in terms of wounding. The loss of family time, meals around the table, playing board games, having, weekends together as a family, all of that can have an impact on the loss of feelings to our kids. And the last one, which to me is just as important, if not more, is the lack of cultural understanding around the need of emotion to move for its expression. And so oftentimes we are quick to try to shut down things. We're quick to trying to bring kids to calmness, to happiness. And so the kids will interpret this as a way in which their emotions are not welcome. And so all of this has an impact on feeling. The way that the anatomy of emotion functions is the following. You have the chemistry of the body first with the physiological parts. All of that comes with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Emotions move us. All of that comes together. Emotions will push impulses. If you're able to connect to your emotions and feel them, then you have more consciousness. And then you've got perception, the thought that comes with that. But perception is last. We used to think that if we thought right, we would feel better. And it's actually the opposite. Right thinking is not what is needed for us to feel better. What we need to feel better is to feel safe. It's that sense of safety. And so if the part of the brain, the more primitive part of the brains feel safe and that emotions can be felt, then the rest will follow. And so if we look at this anatomy of emotions this way, and so, for example, the alarm and the frustration, all of the chemistry and the physiology of it is the adrenaline, the cortisol, and so forth. We may have an increase in blood pressure, heart rate, and so forth. The impulses that come from the emotions in frustration could be for us to be moved, to be pushed to affect change, or the alarm for us to move to caution. If we're able to feel those emotions, we would be able to say, if we're frustrated that the situation's not working for us, or there's no way through, or if we are alarmed, we may be able to say that we're scared. And it is only once we're able to perceive our feelings that then we are able to find different ways to be able to address those feelings. And so emotions become feeling when it is felt or becomes conscious. Feeling our emotions allow for them to fulfill their destiny. And so if the emotion cannot be felt, all of what is at the foundation of it, from the chemistry to the physiological part to the impulses to the emotions, all of that still takes place. And so you can have an emotion and not feel that emotion, but the emotion will still exist. And so what will happen, unfortunately, in those moments is if we're not able to feel those emotions and perceive those feelings, then we're not able to talk about those emotions, to walk through them, to find the tools that work for us and so forth. And so these emotions will take a tangent, and the impulse to attack from the frustration will lead to behaviors like us being impatient, being abrupt, being rude, being irritable, having tantrums and outbursts, eruptions of attacking energy, whether it's kicking, hitting, biting, or whatnot. And so the reason why the behaviors happen in this case is because we are not able to recognize our emotions and find a way through. The same thing with our alarm. And so if we're not able to recognize that we're afraid of something specific and walk ourselves through it, and find our courage or find our patience in frustration, we will have the impulse to avoid the situation, for example. And so things like fear, hypervigilance, anxiety-reducing behavior, obsessions, compulsions, avoidance, agitation, all of these are consequences of alarm that is not being felt. And so the solution here is not for us to shut down alarm and frustration. Our solution here is to bring back the feeling, and this will be the way through. And so for emotions to be felt, we need three things. We need for emotions to move. And when I say move, sometimes it can be physiologically, even, to do some movement, some exercise and so forth, but it could also be movement through different types of mediums. Music moves us, singing moves us, art moves us. All of this can help, writing, whatever that is, singing, all of these things can help us move our emotions through. Finding the words, the symbols, or the images, when we're able to describe, to recognize and to describe what it is that we're feeling, it is easier for us to then know what to do with it. And so to be able to find the words, the symbols, or the images to name those emotions. And the most important is, are we feeling safe enough to feel those emotions? Is our heart soft enough? Are we vulnerable enough to allow ourselves to feel the full extent of those emotions vulnerably? And so if we go back to the three keys of of resiliency, yes, emotional expression is the first one, but the second one is the sense of safety. How can we adults help our kids feel safe? Safety is the starting point. And so giving priority to prevention work. We know that doing things in the preventative mode, not only is it more beneficial for the student, but it is also easier for us to be able to be impactful and successful in the preventative mode. First of all, the student is much more receptive in the prevention mode when they're in a good place. When they are upset, when they are dysregulated, the first thing that goes is the auditory processing. And so they are not receptive. They are not hearing us. It's much more difficult for us to bring them to a place of helping them walk through their emotions when they are upset. And so we don't do our best work when they're upset, nor do they, or nor do we. They can try new things and see what works and what doesn't when they're upset. And so we want to give space for priority for prevention work, providing check-ins with those students, especially those that are easily defended. And in those check-ins, we could be doing exploration of different tools that work for them, bonding that relationship further and so forth. And so important, that sense of safety. Using structures, routines, and predictability, especially for our trauma kids, or even our neurodiverse population for whom the physical environment has a big impact. This helps for them to feel more grounded, for things to feel more predictable, for them to feel safer. And so for us to be intentional in the way that we set up a physical and social environment of a space, honoring inclusive practices, honoring neurodiversity, all of that is part of building that sense of safety, portraying ourselves as a strong and tempered adult, having what we call an alpha posture. It doesn't mean that we've got things under control. The situation can be very much out of control, and we could be, in a place where we don't know what to do next. It is not about what we know and what we should be doing or not doing. It is all in the way that we portray ourselves. It's a lot about appearances, helping the student know that even though they're dysregulated, that we've got them, that we're there for them. We focus on our own regulation, our own posture, making them feel like we're taking the lead, that we're taking care of them. Greeting and engaging students, showing warmth, delight, and enjoyment. I understand that we're in the business of working with kids, but ultimately they need to feel, because relationship is their most preeminent need, that we're not there because it's our job, that we're there because we care, that we're there because we have delight in their presence, and that even if the student is a challenging student, how can we find those moments of enjoyment, even if it's playing a board game or whatever that is? But those kids are desperately looking for them to belong, for them to feel welcome and so forth. And so for us to greet them and engage them, to call them by their name, to show that we're interested and we know who they are, being actively involved beyond academics, meeting them at their interests, remembering what is important to them, listening to them fully. All of that makes an impact, a huge impact in terms of sense of safety. Being careful in the type of discipline that we use, making sure that those methods don't cause more separation, that they don't cause shame and embarrassment, being able to preserve the child's dignity if they do need to step out of class, if they do need a break, if they do need to leave to go home for the day. How can we set it up in a way that we make them feel like, yeah, today was a hard day. Today we didn't make it through, but I believe in you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. We're going to do this yet again. And we call this bridging, to be able to connect back to that next point of connection, and for them to feel that the behavior there is not the bottom line, that even if they had a bad day, it doesn't change the fact that they're our student and we still want to work with them, that we believe in their growth. All of that is so needed and necessary. Offering a variety of emotional playgrounds to express emotions. And so what I mean by playgrounds can be through music, could be through art, through movement, through sports. And I've got a whole list later on in the presentation, but these are all different avenues, different playgrounds, with or without words, because many kids don't do well with words. They shut down. The second you look at them face to face and you try to pull it out of them, there's no way through with those types of kids. You need to go about it more indirectly. Being careful that we're not always in a fix-it mode, that we're rather than pushing our agenda, that we respect their rhythm and that we follow where they're at, that we invite them to share their thoughts and feelings with us, of course, if they can. And the last piece is supporting and enhancing protective factors. For example, for them to have at least one adult in their life where they feel secure, whomever that is. I've seen kids that their adult was the school secretary, was the school caretaker. And so you need to at least figure out for each single student, who is that one significant adult for them that they feel safe with. Building on that sense of belonging to school, how can we go about doing that? And I'll have more examples in the third part of the presentation. Availability of support measures that are adapted to the student's needs. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not a neurotypical approach. It is a neurodiverse inclusive approach where we're really trying to cater to the kids' needs, to access to giving kids access to healthy and positive extracurricular activities. How many kids don't feel successful at school, don't do well academically. And so where else in other spheres of their life they can feel successful, that they feel they belong, they feel they can contribute, whether through art, through sports, through a little job that they may have at school. It's so central for them to be able to find their place. And another piece to me that is so vital is the home school relationship. How many of our kids feel the divide between home and school? They want to be loyal to their parents or to their caregivers, and don't feel that they can belong to the school because they're being disloyal to their family. How can we work on building those relationships between home and school so kids don't feel that it's this or that, that is this and that we're together, working together as a team? And those are not easy things to do. These take time. These things take planning, and organization. But my goodness, the energy that we put into social emotional learning, if we can put the same degree of energy into these protective factors, the difference that this would make. And so Gabor Mate, who is the co-author of Gordon Neufeld's book, Hold On to Your Kids, but he also wrote a book called, why am I forgetting the title right now? Oh my goodness, I forget, it's behind me. Anyway, it's around trauma. I forget the title right now, but in his book he writes, safety is not the absence of threat. Safety is the presence of connection also. And so sometimes we focus very much on adversity, focus on the stressors, the triggers, and we try to minimize those. But then we don't realize to what degree some kids have a hard time connecting with others, that they don't truly attach. And until they can truly attach, even if we remove the absence of the stressor, the trigger, the threat, it doesn't mean they feel safe. And so safety, this is from Mona de la Hooke's book, Beyond Behaviors. She wrote, safety is in the eye of the beholder. And so it's not what we judge as safe. It's not because we're a warm adult, we're a welcoming adult, that the room has been thought through in terms of neurodiversity, that the child is necessarily feeling safe. It is a very subjective experience. And so it is about us attempting different things, trial and error, and seeing what works and what doesn't for each kid. The third law of emotion is that emotion seeks balance by mixing emotions, but only when the child is developmentally ready. And so the capacity for self-control and consideration can only develop with the right conditions. The conditions need to be optimal. They need to be favorable. If the brain is occupied with survival mode, there is no room for survival and growth. And so if we can put the brain at rest for survival and make space for growth, then will come balance, stability, reflection, self-control, consideration. All of this fruit of development, of mixing, will come. But it requires, first of all, prefrontal cortex development, and it requires for us to be able to practice mixing emotions. And I'll get to that in a second, in terms of making it more concrete for you. But before I get there, and just to reiterate that the prefrontal cortex development takes time. A 5-year-old is very far from having a developed prefrontal cortex and to have all the fruit of that. They've only begun at 5, and only if all of the conditions are there. And so a child who's hypersensitive, that gap of 5 to 7 moves to 7 to 9. And so even look here at the pictures, a preteen, we're talking about an 11, 12-year-old here. The blue and purple, by the way, is the maturation of the brain that's fully developed. And you see, it's not only, before the 20s that we, in the teens, yes, part of it, but mostly in the 20s. And so the kids that you're working with at the elementary level are from our 5-year-olds to our 11, 12-year-olds. They are nowhere near ready to have all of the prefrontal cortex development, to have the capacity to integrate, to have cognitive dissonance, to be able to mix their emotions fully. And so they need us as that reference point to do it with them. They cannot do this by themselves. And some kids can better than others, but they need to be in a good place. They need to be not too hungry, not too tired. They need to be not upset. And then they're able to have perspective and to mix those emotions. But the second that they're too upset, too triggered, too dysregulated, there's no way in those moments that they're not able to access those tools that we've shown them. Even if when they're calm, they're able to show to us, and in their explanation they've understood, it doesn't mean they're able to retrieve them in that moment. And so, although development is spontaneous, it is not inevitable. It requires support. It requires for the child to be at rest emotionally. Because, like I said before, if the child is in a survival mode, there's no room for both, for growth and survival. Children cannot manage emotions that they do not feel, and they cannot feel emotions that are not named or expressed. I mentioned this before with the first two keys, the first two laws. And so, of course, even if there is the capacity to develop the prefrontal cortex and to have the ability to mix emotions, if for whatever reason they have not felt those emotions, or that those emotions don't have words, or that they haven't been invited to express those emotions, those impulses, then there's no capacity to manage something that you don't make space for. Self-control is not on the developmental agenda until the 5th year of life, as I mentioned in the previous slide, and is not a reliable capacity. Even when development is optimal, this takes several years to develop. And of course, the capacity to self-control does not respond very well to the direct approach. For us to focus directly onto the fruit of self-control, we're going about it the wrong way. To take shortcuts, to put pressure onto the child for results, all of those not only are not developmentally appropriate, but they can actually cause more harm than good. And so, just to show you to what extent the brain is limited for some of those kids, and we can see where the challenge come from. So I mentioned the prefrontal cortex, but even the cerebellum and the corpus callosum are underdeveloped with the immature child. And so when your cerebellum is underdeveloped, you have a harder time to find information, that is efficient and quick. And so even if when you are calm, you know that you've got tools that you can use to help yourself calm, that when you are upset, if you have an underdeveloped cerebellum, it is much more difficult to access in your brain the memory of where those, which tools they are, how do we use these tools, and so forth. And so it's much more difficult for them to do that. Because they have an underdeveloped corpus callosum, they also have a harder time seeing the whole picture. And so they're very much egocentric at that age. And also, it is one emotion at a time, one thought at a time. Consideration and empathy is very difficult for our immature kids. They're not able to focus on themselves and others. Having consideration and empathy is not something they've developed quite well just yet. And of course, as I mentioned before, when you have an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, you have a harder time to temper those instinctual reactions. You have a harder time having conflicting thoughts and feelings that help neutralize and balance those impulses. And so as a result, they often know better, but they cannot do better as emotions overwhelm reason. Behavior will improve over time when maturation occurs, but this takes time. And so in the meantime, children need adults to grow the capacity to temper their emotions. When their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. And so emotional support and accompaniment must come first and pave the way towards emotional self-control eventually. But in the meantime, we need to plant that seed. And so this requires support and accompaniment from our part. Emotion regulation is not about exerting tight control over what we feel. And it's not about banishing negative emotions and feeling only positive ones. Rather, emotion regulation starts with giving ourselves and others the permission to our own feelings, all of them. And so when I was talking about mixing, I'm going to make it more clear now to you. So emotional self-control is not the absence of emotion. It is the fruit of mixed feelings, the integrative functioning. And so empathy, for example, is the combination of having consideration and caring towards others. This is what allows for empathy to come. In order for us to be courageous, there is the fear, the alarm, but there's also the care, the desire, the motivation. And it's the two together that brings courage. Courage is not the lack of fear. Courage is that we move forward with our desire and motivation despite the fear. Patience. Patience is what helps to temper our impulse to attack. And so what we need here is not to remove the impulse to attack. We need to add the element of caring, and so forth. So forgiveness, to be integral, and self-sacrifice, all of that requires mixed feelings. So just to kind of bring it even more in detail for both patience and courage. So patience is the fruit of mixing between the impulse to attack and the desire to attach. And so when we've got the impulse to bite, to strike, to insult, to criticize, to put down, to yell at, to be sarcastic, to ignore, and so forth, if we have to counter that, to balance it, the desire to keep close, to take care of, to protect, to be loyal to, and to not disappoint, and so forth, it is those secondary level of emotions or feelings that will allow to balance that impulse to attack. This is how we help kids find their patience. Is not that we make them feel shameful for their impulse, is that we help them find a way through to balancing through their sense of care and responsibility. The same thing with courage. And so courage, we've got the fear of being laughed at, appearing stupid, meeting disapproval, and so forth. And what will give us the courage to face that adversity regardless is the desire to engage in that activity, to be part of something, to share our story, to express our opinions, and so forth. And so courage is not about not being afraid. It's about trying to find the desire within it to trump that fear. And so how can we help plant that seed with our kids to find the other hand? And so on the one hand, I feel the fear, but on the other hand, I know that if I avoid, then I will miss out. And so what's that motivation or that desire on the other end? The trick, though, for all of this is that if you don't feel your emotions, then there is nothing to work with, because you don't have a sense of care. If you don't have a sense of caring and responsibility, none of these can happen. And so the thing about feeling is the more you feel your feelings, the easier it is for you to understand them, to feel comfortable with them, to be able to pick up a relationship with them. And so feeling your emotions and practicing feeling your emotion helps to tease apart the different emotions, and it helps then for mixed feelings. But it also helps that if you stay attuned to your emotions, that you remain vulnerable in your feelings, that then you will have the other side of the coin to help you get to the fruit. Without care, there is no courage. Without caring and responsibility, there is no patience. These require the other side, and they require the vulnerable emotions. So when we're focused prematurely on result, on self-regulation, in a divorced way from the context, when we're focused on pushing kids to be good, to be kind, to be nice, to be positive, to calm down, to be happy, to not be upset, we are ignoring the natural course of emotions and their steps to grow. And unfortunately, our premature focus and putting consequences if the child doesn't follow through for self-regulation is that we prevent from the natural course of it. And so our job is not reflection and mixing. This will come naturally if we put our focus on the bottom part first, if we invite emotion to express itself, if we help kids to find the words, find the symbols and the images to describe what it is that they're feeling, to make the connection body and mind, to help them feel safe enough, connected enough for them to continue to feel those emotions. And if we're able to introduce and model what that looks like to mix feelings, all of that will help for them on their own to have a relationship with their own feelings, have a relationship with cognitive dissonance and mixed feelings, and they will get to reflection naturally, but only if we make space for the first steps. Now, keep in mind that a child cannot have a relationship with other people's feelings without having a relationship with their own feelings first. And so we have a relationship with the child's feeling. We plant that seed. We help them feel safe, not ashamed of their emotions. They pick up a relationship with their emotions, feel their emotions, work way through, are able to mix, and eventually they will be able to have consideration and empathy for others, but not before they can have it for themselves. So now we're going to look at part 2 of this presentation, look at what's the difference between social emotional learning and nurturing emotional health and growth. And some of you may think that I'm just playing with words here and that they're the same thing. You will see as I unfold each of them that there is a distinction between the two. So first of all, I kind of wanted to set the stage for social emotional learning. Where does it come from in the first place? Excuse me, I'm just going to take a gulp of water. So the definition of social emotional learning is that it is an educational method that aims to foster social and emotional skills within a school curricula. This is what social and emotional learning is. And so it is about teaching, it is about gaining competencies or skill, and it is done in an academic type of lens. So there's an emphasis that social and emotional skills are meant to be learned to the same degree as other subjects such as math, science, and reading. SEL began in the 1960s at the Yale School of Medicine and Child Studies Center. The Professor James Comer studied the education systems of low-income African-American communities due to their poor academic report cards. And when they put in place these competence-based programs that focused on social emotional needs of those students, they were able to recognize that the attention to emotion and to social development helped those kids to be more successful in school. In 1987, Roger Weisberg, who's actually the founder of the CASTLE program, and we'll talk about that in a second, and his colleagues, so Timothy Shriver and others, they established the New Haven Social Development Program. It's only in 1994 that they founded the CASTLE program, which stands for the Collective for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So it is from 1994 to 1997, they did a lot of studies around the country because this was out of the US, and they funded their own studies in terms of disproving that social emotional learning was the key in order to help students be more successful. In 1997, they promoted the guide for educators that was called Social Emotional Learning. And from there, the organization has led the way to bring SEL into schools worldwide. SEL is closely linked, by the way, to Daniel Goleman's construct of emotional intelligence and this idea behind the fact that emotions can be schooled. And so, by the way, Roger Weisberg, who founded CASTLE, acknowledges on his website that that the only programs that demonstrate lasting results have involved the component of positive parent-child relationship in the program. And so if the program only focused on teaching the skills, but was divorced from the context that we didn't put emphasis on the parent-child relationship, that those kids didn't do as well. And so this to me is key here, this piece there about there's attachment in this equation. It is not just about teaching skills. Now, some of the more popular programs at the elementary level are the following. I'll name 3 different ones. And so CASTLE, of course, is one of them. But the other one that we see a lot in schools are the zones of regulation, where we look at the 4 different colors of zones, and that each of the different zones will attach to a category of emotions. I want to bring your attention to something for a second, because I don't know, if all of you know this. The zones of regulation was actually designed by an OT and she had a specific idea in mind when she developed the zones of regulation. So I'm going to read an excerpt from an article that she wrote back in 2011. She wrote, "The students on my OT caseload were amazing kids who were often misunderstood and found themselves in trouble because of their differences and challenges in managing their feelings and behavior. In an effort to reduce disciplinary and exclusionary measures, my main goal was to offer positive and proactive instruction that truly helped my students gain an understanding of their feelings and find adaptive tools and strategies for communication, coping, and wellness. Though I am thrilled to see its widespread adoption and use, I am concerned to see some misinterpretation of my intentions and the zones sometimes being used as a behavioral or compliance model, particularly centered on feeling in or returning to the green zone. This was never my objective. My mission is to honor all feelings and experiences people have in their bodies, as well as valuing the differences in how we regulate. And so I really wanted to reiterate that even the zones of regulation that are more of an SEL and about teaching emotions, the fact that this program has taken tangents and that it has become this behavioral management tool, and that we're focused on staying in the green or coming back to the green, was never meant. That wasn't the design of the program. The design of the program was for us to remain curious and open and without being judgment, and that all zones had a space. And it was to help kids identify how they were feeling from their bodies to their mind. Another popular program that is more recent, that has been used more and more depending on the school board, is Muzoom. And so Muzoom is an electronic platform where kids get to watch different skits, get to watch different videos of kids that are faced with different situations. And then as the student gets to select a decision, then the scenario will move from one situation to the next. And then you will see the outcome of the decision that you've made. And there's lesson plans and all sorts of things. And so this is Muzoom. And the third one, and there's other ones, I could be naming so many other ones, but those are the most popular. Of course, the one that has remained, the founder, and also the one that has remained, is the castle approach. And in the castle approach, there are 5 different areas of social and emotional learning. The first one is self-awareness, self-management. There is social awareness, relationship skills, and decision-making, responsible decision-making. And so those are the 5 different areas. And as you notice in all of the circles that are around the 5 areas, it is not meant to be applied just in the classroom. We are looking for a classroom approach through instruction and classroom climate, but we're also looking at a school-wide approach through school culture, practices, and policies. We are looking at an approach through families and caregivers, where there's an authentic partnership with families. And the last piece is with communities, where there's aligned learning opportunities with our community partners. And so it is meant to be contextual, not just about, divorced from context, just teaching different emotional skills. So in the castle model, if we look at the 5 different areas of development, so I'll read through here on the right-hand side, the results or the fruit that they're looking for. So in the self-awareness, they're looking for the child being able to identify their emotions, have accurate self-perception, to recognize their strength, to have self-confidence. In the second one, for self-management, we're looking for the student to be able to have impulse control, to be able to manage their stress, have self-discipline, self-motivation, goal setting, organizational skills. In the third one, which is social awareness, looking for the student to have perspective, to be able to take and to give perspective, to have empathy, to appreciate diversity, to respect others. The fourth one, relationship skills, looks at capacity for communication, for social engagement, for relationship building, and for teamwork. And the last one, which is responsible decision-making, we're looking at the student being able to identify problems, analyze situations, solving problems, evaluating, reflecting, and having ethical responsibility. And so all of these are seen through the CASTLE framework as skills to be acquired, to be taught. And so what I want to look at now is the other flip of the coin, being able to nurture emotional health and growth. And what does that look like? And how does that compare to social and emotional learning? And so Hannah Beach, who has written the book Reclaiming Our Students, also wrote the article called Kids Need a Safe Space to Feel. In this article, she writes the following: emotional health cannot be taught. Building emotional health calls for experiences that puts us in touch with the full spectrum of human emotions, even the ones that we often try so hard to avoid. Change doesn't begin with managing our emotions as an intellectual process that we systematically think through in the heat of the moment. Change True, deep, long-lasting change is something that comes from the inside out. It begins with feeling our emotions, being truly aware of them, having the space to express them, and then acting on them in ways that are appropriate. It is at the emotional level, at the deepest, most long-lasting change occur. And it is on this level that we have to engage our kids if we want to support their emotional well-being. So nurturing emotional health and growth is a lifelong process. It actually starts with the adults, not with the kids. And it is meant to be experiential. The adults are meant to set up the conditions for it to unfold naturally, rather than trying to work directly at it and trying to teach the skills prematurely. We are setting up the conditions to let it unfold naturally. It needs to be peppered into our everyday life and can be built in implicitly in everything that we do. It can be infused in our day-to-day practices. And for those kids that have a hard time with a direct approach, it can work better for those if the experience is done in the play mode. And so in an indirect, non-threatening, expressive type of activity. Nurturing emotional health and growth isn't just about self-regulation. Students' success and well-being rely on the adult's intent to provide the right conditions to manage the circumstances instead of trying to control the student's behavior at all cost. Laurie Desautels, who wrote the book Connections Over Compliance, mentions that social and emotional learning needs to be redefined. It is about the health of our nervous systems. So she even goes one step further, where she yes, about emotions and about feelings, but even about, you know, the chemistry and the physiology of our emotions. That if we are able to feel safe in our bodies, that we're able to recognize our sensations, that it is, and this is much about the adults as it is about the students. And so we have a role in this as much as the kids do. How can we help support nurturing, emotional health and growth through experiences that support a sense of safety and connection? This will help the students soften in their defenses and will lead to wholeheartedness, where they can feel their vulnerability. But for that to happen, it requires for the adults to have a tender-hearted care, that they show warmth and gentle care, and that the adults show empathy, compassion, and vulnerability. This requires the adults to carry out their role and responsibility in fulfilling the students' attachment needs. It requires reflective practices on the part of the adult, thinking about prevention as a priority, thinking about teamwork, co-caring among the adults, and that we keep ourselves in check, that we use mirrors, in the figurative sense, to gain perspective about our own energies and our tempering. We need to keep in mind how neuroception, that sense of danger that the brain will pick up, can impact the sense of safety, and what can we do to help calibrate the stress response. It requires from the adults to adjust the circumstances for the student, whether the physical environment or the social environment, and to help them stay out of trouble through structures, routines that minimize the stress intake. The irony that I see with some of the approaches that we use is that sometimes what we say, what we teach, actually becomes almost contradictory to how we are in our being and our actions with students. There was a study that came out in 2016 by Claire Beaumont, where she talks about the impact of adult-student relationships in schools. And in her research, she finds that the more students experience negative treatment from adults, whether adults are rude, or that they stare with contempt, or that they yell or insult or humiliate or ignore the student when they're being mistreated by others, that when students find themselves experiencing these things, the more they experience this, the more they will be aggressive with other peers, and the more adults will report being attacked by those students. And so there is truth in the matter of saying, it's not just saying, do what I say, not what I do. Oh my goodness, is it important here that we are aligned not just about what we say and we teach and we convey, but all in the way that we are with kids, that what we do, how we are in our daily exchanges are just as important, if not more important, for kids to feel safe, to feel their emotions, and to be able to develop all of the fruit of that maturation. And so, you know, it's so telling. The study is so telling. And so I see the irony with, you know, that adult that is impatient with their students and are trying to teach empathy or teach respect, and yet they themselves are not empathetic and respecting students. This will not fly. Kids will not do what you say. They will do what you do. And so important to remind ourselves that the whole experience is meant to be empowering for the child, not to cause more distress and discomfort. That our expectations must be realistic and adapted to the child's individual needs and differences, and that it's about collaboration and support between us and them. And even if they are showing signs of maturation, they still need us to nurture and to guide them. And so Gordon Neufeld says that all true growth emanates from a place of rest. And so it is through a sense of safety and connection that rest can come. And so if we are able to develop our attachment through physical proximity, through a sense of sameness, through belonging and loyalty, through significance, and so forth, that all of this attachment will help the student feel safe and connected, will bring them to a place of rest, and then growth will come. And so if we were to look at it from a different angle, having safe relationships, being able to shield the child between safe relationships and offering emotional playgrounds will help keep their hearts soft, will help them feel their emotions, especially the vulnerable ones like sadness. This will bring rest and relief. This will lead to healing and recovery if needed. And this will bring to optimal functioning, to growth and resilience. And so this is our job: safe relationship, emotional playground. This is our job. It's so different from the social emotional learning where we are focused directly at the symptoms, directly at what we call competencies and skills. Here we are looking at it from a foundational perspective, feeding the foundation, and the rest will unfold naturally. The other beauty about attachment is not only does it help a student feel safe and connected and bring to a place of rest, but it is also through our attachment that we have natural influence. And so when a student is connected to us through a sense of sameness, they will want to follow our rules and values because they want to be like us, or they will follow them because they want to belong or to be loyal to us, or because they want to be special in our eyes through significance. And so if we are able to develop with our students that attachment through, at least at the level of sameness, that we will from there have a natural ability to influence and to be able to pass on our values and so forth, and to be able to pass down, to plant the seed for them to unfold their natural potential. So I want to show you now, through the developmental lens, how did the fruit of maturation unfolds naturally. And so if we go back to the slide really quickly, and I was saying that, you know, having a safe environment can bring to growth. And so growth here, the tree that is growing here is this, which are the three processes, the maturational processes to help somebody grow up. The three processes are emergence, adaptation, and integration. And so we're going to walk through each of these briefly. Again, you know, Gordon Neufeld offers a course on this. There's hours and hours of material on this. I'm really not giving it justice. I'm kind of doing an overview here. But the capacity to emerge, to become emergent, is for us to be able to be viable as a separate being, to become our own person, to be able to take care of ourselves, to be full of vitality, that we're not easily bored, that we're not worried about being alone, that we are creative in our solitude, that we have a sense of agency and responsibility, that we're full of interest and curiosity, that we have an energy that is venturing forth, that pushes us to you know, discover and so forth. We have a relationship with ourself, and that we have a strong quest for independence. And so I highlighted two elements here in that list, because if I were to go back to this slide here on the different attributes that the castle model is looking for, you will notice that these that are here repeat themselves in the other slide, But the difference is in the castle model, we are teaching these from the outside in, whereas these are meant to unfold from the inside out. But and so it's not about pulling and pushing those attributes individually, about attacking them directly. It's about setting the stage for them to unfold naturally. And so in terms of the process of adaptation, when we are able to develop that and we become mature in there, we're able to learn from our mistakes. We accept limits and restrictions. We learn from consequences. We adapt to circumstances, and we are resilient and resourceful. And also the third process, the integrative process, which attaches to the prefrontal cortex development, the attributes from that, the potential that comes from that is being well-tempered, whether patient, courageous, and so forth, being considerate and civilized, showing empathy, being balanced and having perspective, appreciating context, is able to solve problems, can learn from dissonance. All of these different fruits come from these three different processes. So if I were to go back to the castle model and have the 5 different areas around here, if we're now comparing it to the developmental approach, I would put here in the middle what is required for these to unfold. And so the first one, I'm kind of, reviewing what it is that we've seen in the part 2 of this presentation. So the attachment that needs to be developed enough that they can feel safe and at rest and grow, that they're able to feel, that they're able to feel their sense of safety, their caring, their responsibility, that their hearts remain soft, that their prefrontal cortex has developed. They have fruit of emergence, adaptation, integration, and of course, having support and modeling from adults. If we are able to have this as the front and center, the rest will come. So now if I were to compare side by side, nurturing emotional health and growth through emotional support and accompaniment versus being coercively pushing kids for self-regulation through the SEL lens, I'm going to compare them side by side. And so when we have emotional support and accompaniment, we are aware of the adult's own emotional state and stress response as a priority. We're not focusing on the child's only, we're focusing on our own because we know that ours will have an impact on theirs. Focusing on the student's sense of safety, sensations and feelings, as well as the adult-student dynamic. Helping the student find balance through the adult's own soothing posture and tone. Soothing the student in their upset, even when that upset is hostile. Obviously, again, of course, within parameters of safety. Adapting the circumstances accordingly. Acting like a thermostat to hold a steady temperature. And so our tempering, grounding energy is there to help soothe them and bring them to a place where they can match ours. Meeting the student's needs through the application of specific measures of support and accompaniment. And remember, we're focusing here on their needs. And by the way, we're going to, in the third part of this presentation, we're going to look at what are those specific measures. And the last part here is providing debrief and follow-up, creating a preventative plan of action for the future. So we're not just focused on the now in the incident, we're focusing on prevention, and we're also focusing on post-intervention and being able to adapt to that situation, put together a plan, and to move forward from there. And so the course of self-regulation through the SEL lens focuses on the external elements to fix or control the problem. They focus on the student's behavior, what they've done wrong. They look to stop the inappropriate behavior through the adult's authoritative posture and tone. They up the ante when the student is hostile to attempt to shut it down, acting like a thermometer that reacts to the rise of the student's behavior. You need to keep in mind your CPI or your BMS training, the importance of de-escalation. It's not about us being triggered by them. It is keeping ourselves in check and that we are there to be able to help them to come back to a state that is more manageable. Focusing on the outcome and how to achieve it by, for example, applying a consequence. And oftentimes in that type of approach, there isn't much briefing or any briefing, not much follow-up or any, and there aren't often a plan beyond the incident. And so it's not an approach that is as preventative and proactive and so forth as the developmental approach. So now I want to look at the third part of this presentation, where we're going to walk through the different support measures that we can put in place at tier 1, 2, and 3. And so tier 1, meaning for all students, having universal best practices that are school-wide or whole class or school-wide in terms of support and approach. At tier 2, we're looking at some students, the ones that have challenges for whom the universal best practices are not enough. And so for some of those kids, they need to have more targeted practices, and those can be done in small group. And the tier 3 kids that are the highly challenging students, those are the small percentage of kids in our building. And they benefit better from individualized practices and from personalized one-to-one support. Now, I've come to recognize in some schools that don't put enough prevention in place and that are constantly focused on putting out fires, that some of these tier 3 kids or tier 2 kids will become increasingly more representative in that pyramid. And so it is important for us to work preventatively and proactively for that not to happen. So the best approaches are meant to be systemic, not piecemeal. There must be a buy-in from the top and from the bottom. Emotions can't be addressed only in a 10-minute morning meeting or every Thursday on fourth period. It has to be an everyday thing. It has to become part of the school's DNA. There needs to be a common vision and language among all stakeholders. It has to be integrated into leadership, instruction, faculty meetings, family engagement, hiring procedures, and policies. Furthermore, the best efforts towards emotion are proactive, not reactive. Being proactive means we don't wait for problems to arise and then deal with them. We adopt measures to prevent them. In some schools, this means a shift in mindset from focusing primarily on having students follow the rules to supporting students preventatively and creating emotionally safe spaces. And so keeping in mind the 3 keys to resiliency, the fostering the sense of safety and belonging, making room for emotional expression, and creating opportunities to discover and to build a sense of strength, courage, and confidence. We didn't talk much about that third part. We're going to look at it now in this third portion of the presentation. So if we want to focus on universal best practices, I'm going to present on the first part of each of the tiers, what would happen in the classroom with the support of the teacher. And I'm also going to have a separate slide where I'm going to talk about specifically the role of support staff within this. So in terms of the whole group support measures, again, reiterating being in the prevention mode. So this is done every day, all day. This is not something that we do sometimes randomly. And so focusing on fostering a sense of safety and predictability for the students, having clear and explicit structures and routines, having diverse and inclusive practices, being intentional in the physical setup of the classroom. And so, thinking about our neurodiverse population, some of the senses can be triggered. And so thinking about them being neurodiverse, being inclusive in the way that we do things. And not just in the classroom, in other spaces in the building, in the hallway, in the schoolyard, all of that needs to be taken into consideration. How can we cultivate a sense of connection, inclusion, and belonging, whether through authentic adult greeting, having class meetings, doing group projects, activities for inclusion and team building, exposing kids to interest in social clubs, sports teams, family and community involvement. All of this can help cultivate a sense of connection, inclusion, and belonging at tier 1. Allotting time for breaks and emotional respite. And so having a reset corner, a quiet corner, whether or quiet individual activities, whether this is done in the classroom. Some classrooms don't have the space for that quiet corner. It could be done right outside of the classroom. There's different ways in which we can do this, or that sometimes some schools have like a back walk-in closet where they put a lot of materials. I've seen very creative schools that have done that too, like within those spaces. Providing opportunities for emotional release in engaging ways. And so brain break activities would be part of that. The other thing that would be part of that is emotional release activities. So brain breaks is one thing, but emotional release activities is something else. And they of course can be not necessarily interchangeable, but I'll show you what I mean in a second. So the emotional release activities, being able to introduce and model how to express those emotions through those playgrounds. The handbook Inside Out, which comes with the Reclaiming Our Students book, and I've got a slide on that in a second. I'll show you the link where you can go and get the handbook, would be a great place to start to inspire yourself on what activities we could be doing with our kids to express their emotions. Helping students build their language of emotion and matching the words to their inner experience. This could be done through stories, through role playing, through puppets. There's so many ways that we can do this. Creating opportunities for students to build their sense of strength. So here it is. Here's that third key for resiliency. Helping students, through these non-threatening activities to try something new. How often we've got kids that avoid novelty, that avoid things that they think they're not going to be good at, that they're afraid of failure. To help them attempt at facing a challenging situation, doing a practice that is safe for them to do, allowing ourselves to make those mistakes, and all of that can be done in the play mode as a starting point. And another piece too is in terms of the executive functioning development, how can we plant that seed, supporting them implicitly through our everyday practice, whether through activities that promote student interaction and cooperation, whether it's through activities that encourage self-awareness and social awareness, project-based activities. And so the difference between social emotional learning and this approach is that we're not necessarily working at it directly, where we're trying to instill the skill. We're just trying to set the stage, to create the opportunities, to offer the material, to plant the seed, and this will unfold naturally. And so what support staff can do at Tier 1 is they can help other staff and students be familiar with the role that the support staff has, and in the way that they can be involved in supporting for emotional development. What is the when, the where, the how that they can be accessed for support? What tools and strategies do they have available to them? What are the rules and parameters that are in place to be able to access those services and so forth? And so support staff can make themselves available for this, but also to let their colleagues and students know about that. Because you have a very central role in emotional development, not just the teachers. When needed and relevant, being able to support the teacher in cultivating a sense of belonging through these different types of activities that I mentioned before, animating brain breaks or emotional release activities, facilitating and activities to build emotional literacy and to model the use of body language, facial expressions to convey emotions. And so I've got here some links to different articles on emotion and relationship, attachment and sense of safety, and so forth. And so if you want to read more, I invite you to do so. You've got the link here. What is needed and necessary for those opportunities for emotional expression to happen is for the adults to invite it, making it okay that all emotions, not just the good ones, are okay to be released. Obviously within a structure and has to be safe, but to create pockets of time and space where that can happen. For adults to create the conditions to express, ideally in the preventative mode as well, so we can discover, try out different things, and providing the time, the space, the materials to channel that energy and to let it out. And I mentioned the Inside Out handbook. And so to find different safe and healthy ways to express those emotions with or without words. And so that handbook is really terrific to give ideas. Here are different examples of emotional expression playgrounds, whether through singing, storytelling, journaling, poetry, drama, dancing and movement, playing an instrument, and through art, whether it's drawing, painting, freestyle doodling. And I'm sure there's other examples I haven't named here. These can all be avenues in which we can express emotions. And so to create pockets of time and space and the materials for this. Here is the Inside Out handbook. So you've got the link here to get to the handbook. It is free to download when you've got the book. You just need to put in the password experience. Hannah Beach also has editorials off of her blog of samples that she extrapolated from her Inside Out handbook. So you've got 4 of them on her blog. There's Scribble Time, there's Drawing the Music, there's Be the Conductor, You're the Music, and there's Which Leaf I Am. So I invite you to go and take a look at those. Setting up opportunities for naming emotions, what is required here? And so for the adult to support in building that literacy through stories, through images, of emotions with real faces. It's important to have the real faces because if we put cartoons, it makes it difficult for the student to be able to recognize the facial expression. And so it's really important to have actual faces. Using puppets, songs, lyrics, poetry, and so forth, all of that can help us into finding the words that matches our experience. So important too that the adult doesn't just introduce, but that they help model the identification of the emotions. So it's not just a rote memorization of the language of the words, but that we're able to identify, to recognize the inner experience and to match the right word or the right symbol or the right image that describes it. Because so many of our kids know all the words, but are not able to match the words with the experience. And so that is needed and necessary. And this can be done again in the play mode through art, through music, and role play. And of course, you know, for adults to make it safe so students can remain vulnerable, in touch with their feelings, because of course, without their feelings, they will not be able to match a word to an experience they cannot feel. And so examples that can be used and to help kids name can be through stories. And so I've got examples here of books that that the Center of Excellence have on their website. We've got activities that go with those books, so we invite you to go and take a look at those. Now, I've talked about in class time. I think it's important that I also talk about at the elementary level for transition time, during recess and during lunch, how often things happen in the schoolyard, that we put so much emphasis and energy on structuring the classroom time, and we don't put as much emphasis and energy on that. And I actually think that most of the conflict happens there in the schoolyard and then transfers back to the classroom. And so being able to put together a school team that can focus on this stuff, focusing on making the schoolyard intentional in the way that it's set up, in the way that it's divided, in the materials that are provided, in the supervision that is being done, in the scheduling, and so forth. And so thinking about the where, the who, with whom, the what, the when, the how, with the what, all of that is needed and necessary. And the other thing also that we don't think about often enough that I think is so central and needed is indoor recess. You know, now it's nicer outside, so we're not bogged down with that. But during our winter, when we've got ice everywhere, being able to structure indoor recess. A couple years ago, Martine Demers and Joël Beaubien, one of the teachers, and myself did a presentation on indoor recess and how to be able to structure it to minimize conflict and just to make things more, you know, enjoyable. And so this is a way to be able to help build that sense of safety and connection with the kids through these more structured activities. So I invite you to go and take a look at that on the website. So what can support staff do during transition times? And so animating structured activities in the schoolyard, introducing and modeling how to play games and sport activities. Because our kids don't know how to play, they're always on screens. They need to know how to play, how to use the material, the equipment, explaining the rules and regulation, overseeing the games and sports activities, supporting the cooperation, turn taking, winning, losing, conflict resolution, and etc. This is where support staff can be very valuable in supporting students during transitions. And remember, this is where sometimes it's not intuitive because we're thinking like, we're not talking about emotion, you know, building emotional skills directly, but we're setting up the foundation for them to feel safe and connected, to be at rest, to grow, and to let it unfold. This is a completely different approach. In terms of tier 2, now we're looking at more targeted practices for some students that need above and beyond, and for whom tier 1's not enough. And so these practices can be done in small group. Additional measures for fostering that sense of safety and belonging. And so those are the kids that would benefit from that check-in with an adult. Those could be scheduled, and it could be that we set up small group projects that could be done during transition times, during lunch or recess or whatnot. Having targeted break times for those students. And so not just having the brain breaks in the class, but having also the scheduled movement breaks, having a reset corner or an alternate location where they're able to have some respite, where they're able to use tools, that those tools are assigned specifically to them because we know that it's going to help them with emotional respite. Some kids need sensory tools, could be fidgets, it could be what we call it, flexible seating and whatnot. And so to see what it is that could help students. In terms of emotional expression, doing this in small group activities during recess and lunch, using the Inside Out handbook, we could do this with a small group. In terms of additional targeted opportunities to plant the seed towards emotional growth, and again, that could be done in small group as well, using stories, using role playing, using puppets, all of that could be used towards that. I don't know if maybe I skipped over one. I was talking about the emotional release activities, so having the kinesthetic hallway and the structured activities and games. And the last one is, how can we scaffold for those students that have a harder time with executive functioning to help them to have classroom tools and supports, whether it's for time management, organization and whatnot, small group supported recess and lunch. Some kids don't do well free with no supervision in the schoolyard and during lunchtime. They need to be in a smaller group and do things that are more structured. And so those are the kids that would benefit from that. And so what support staff can do at tier 2 is to implement those check-ins with the kids who need it, to support the teacher in introducing and modeling the use of those tools and materials that are assigned to the student, to be involved in the scheduling of the breaks and what would happen during those breaks if the student needs to have them. Animating small groups during recess and lunch, or perhaps even having a pull-out model during class time for social and emotional development for respite. And creating materials, whether it's visuals, checklists. The Get Ready, Do Done tool is a tool to help students who have a hard time with getting a task accomplished, that we help them to understand how to prepare and plan for the steps, walking them through the steps to the finished product, and having visuals like the first and then and so forth, and to help support those students in those challenges with executive functioning. So in terms of check-ins, I have a whole section on the website that is dedicated to check-ins. There's a video capsule, there's documentation. I invite you to go and take a look at that. I also have a section on the website for classroom quiet corner or reset corner, however you want to call it. And so again, there's a video capsule and there's a document that explains how to put it together, how to use it, the pros, the things to avoid, the things to consider and so forth. So I invite that as well. In terms of the hallway, some schools have kinesthetic pathways or movement stations. Other schools may have different boxes, stations off the wall, and the student gets to do an activity, and those are rotated around the school. These are meant to be quiet activities. They're not meant to distract other kids in other classrooms. And so these could be different things. If a student needs to have a break from the class and that they cannot benefit in that moment from the quiet corner, it could be that we set up a You've Got Mail where we send them somewhere else and that they're able to take a break, whether a movement break or a paper crayon activity. So again, there's a link here on the website to send you to where to get the samples for the You've Got Mail. Here is again, the Inside Out handbook. I also have another document on the website called Understanding Frustration Buildup, and it gives examples of activities that can help release frustration, and these can be done in small group with support staff. And so I invite you to go and take a look at that. And as a support staff, you could organize small group structured activities. And this could either be done through two models. It could either be what we call a supported recess or lunchtime, where we have a group that has been pre-selected and there's a corner dedicated for those kids and they get to do a special activity. Or it could be that what we call an extended recess. So 10-15 minutes before recess actually begins, the support staff will go and pick up those kids that need the extended recess and will go outside before the rest of the kids go outside. And so this way they get to have the yard to themselves and they get to have for 10-15 minutes an activity that is more structured and that there's less distraction. And so this could be a way to help students benefit from feeling safe, feeling that they belong, and to work through some of their conflicts and so forth. At tier 3, now we're looking at the more individualized practices. And again, these are few students that benefit from this. They benefit from one-to-one support. And this is above and beyond tier 1 and tier 2. So we're not meant to take away tier 1 and tier 2 for those kids. We add on tier 3 to tier 1 and tier 2. And so what could be additional ways to foster a sense of safety and belonging? Through a visual schedule, perhaps, through having check-ins that are more often and more systematic, for the student to have access to an alternative space. It could be an NSC, a nurturing support center if you have one, could be an oasis room, whatever that is, whatever space you have where the student could go and feel safe and build a sense of belonging to the school. Some students benefit from a sheltered recess and lunch. I actually have a document dedicated to that I'll show you in a second. Having an involvement in a special project, maybe that could help. Allotting time for responsibility where the student can feel accomplished and successful. This could be a very interesting for a tier 3 student. Adapting or their schedule, personalizing it to their needs, for them to be able to reset their amygdala, not just when, of course, not when they're upset only. We want to do this preventatively. And so we're setting up in the schedule, even when they're in a good place, because we want them to be able to explore different tools, see what works and what doesn't. And they can't do this successfully when they're upset. So we will organize a schedule where students will go, whether it's a cocoon area in the nurturing support center. Some schools have an emotions room where students can let out some of that pent up energy, or a sensory tool, materials type of in a bin, to having access to those materials. All of that can help the student preventatively to reset their amygdala. So sensory materials, fine motor materials, whatever that is. And those could be used either in a bin in the classroom or an alternative space, or going to an alternative space with or without the bin and having access to materials there. Additional personalized emotional release activities. And so those could be done in a movement corner in the nurturing support center. See, the difference between tier 2 and tier 3 is at tier 2, they're still independent enough that those kids could probably go to a movement station in the hallway, go do their thing and go back to class. A kid in tier 3 needs more supervision. They can't structure themselves in the same way. And so those kids need to have adult accompaniment. And so those oftentimes will happen in an alternative space, whether through the nurturing support center or the emotions room. And again, having emotional expression activities done on a one-to-one basis using creative arts with or without words. Again, helping them build their sense of strength through different projects of interest for them, where they can try different things out, different challenges and so forth, and making mistakes and feeling that even though it's been difficult, that they were able to surpass that. That's the thing about the sense of strength. The idea behind building the sense of strength is even though the student has done a task or an activity that has been difficult, what we hope for is that after having completed the activity, although it was difficult for them to do it, that they recognize, oh my goodness, yes, this was hard, but I survived it. Sometimes kids have these very kind of, I don't know how to say it, but like they have this idea that like if they do something that they don't think they can handle, it's almost like they believe they're going to combust or that it's going to be the end of them. And so we want to prove to them that although it was difficult, they didn't combust, they didn't disappear. They're still there, they've made it through, that they've survived it. And this will give them confidence the next time they try something similar, that, yeah, it was hard, but I can do it. And so this is the idea of building the sense of strength. The additional personalized opportunity to plant the seed towards emotional growth and resiliency on that one-to-one basis. And this would be done through the emotions corner, through tools and materials in that. And I'll show you in a second what the emotions corner could look like. And of course, last piece is the personalized plan to compensate and to scaffold for the student's immaturity, the defendedness, which can impact the executive functioning. And so we want to help them, support them, scaffold them for them to be successful. A kid in tier 3 needs to have an action plan. They need to have something concrete, and to be accompanied during transitions and unstructured times. So what support staff can do at tier 3 is to implement, again, the daily check-ins, but those are done one-to-one, and some kids need them more than once a day. Being involved in creating that adapted schedule and supporting the student in alternate locations during those blocks of time, introducing and modeling while in the nurturing support center or elsewhere, the use of the tools and materials that have been assigned to the student, creating those materials, supporting them with their executive functioning challenges, and supporting and collaborating with the teachers during debriefs to help in terms of repair, recovery, and so forth. And so we're not just talking about the incidences. We want to make sure that we prevent, we plan, and that we follow up and we debrief. And so talking about plans, here's an example of a plan that exists off the CBM website. You can make your own. A plan could look like having a table where the first column would be the students' needs and challenges. The second, and you could put strength, of course, in there as well. The second column would be what are the objectives that we're putting in place to answer for the students' needs and challenges. And by the way, you could attach this to the IEP, but you don't have to attach it to the IEP. So that would be the second column. The third column would be, so what support measures am I putting in place to answer to that objective? And then the following column would be, what are the tools and materials that I am using to accompany that support measure to answer to that goal, and that is there to support the need and the challenge. And so when you make it very clear and concrete like this, not only is it useful for if you're not present, if you're absent, somebody replaces you, that they know what you've been doing with the student, but also for the other staff. How often I get staff that say, I don't want to send my student to the nurturing support center because all they do is play there. You want to make it clear to the adults, your colleagues, that when they come to the nurturing support center, they're coming there for a reason. There's a purpose for them to come to you, that you are not doing things randomly. Things are being done intentionally. When you choose a certain tool, and I'm calling it a tool, not a toy, it may look like a toy, but you're using it as a tool with a specific purpose, that all of this is part of the plan. I did a presentation earlier this year on tools versus toys. If you haven't seen it, I strongly invite you to go and take a look at that presentation. But just making that more concrete helps buy-in from the staff, and it helps to make things more clear, and for us to be able to evaluate the objectives, the measures and the tools and materials. Are they working? Are they not working? Do we need to adjust them? And so forth. And so you can only do this if you've got something clear and concrete that's laid out. And so in that, you could have in the plan, the when, the where, the with whom. And so those students that struggle during recess and breaks, being in the hallway, going to the bathroom during lunchtime, substitute teachers, oh my goodness, substitute teachers, I could tell you stories. And so to be able to organize the when, the where, the with whom, what is the plan B for those kids during those different situations? And so in terms of check-ins, check-ins are more than just making sure they've got their materials and that they're ready to go to class. It is meant to be a genuine touch point with the student, that we're there to connect with them first, to talk about their interest for a minute. We're there to build that connection and that sense of safety through the check-in. And so it has to be more than the adult's agenda, that we're there to verify their current emotional state. Are they triggered in the moment? Are they available to go to class? Looking at the capacity to be in class and their readiness to learn. Do they have the necessary materials? And reminding them of their strength and to help them towards achieving their goals. Sometimes just showing to them clearly, that explicitly, that we believe in them can be quite motivating. Some examples of playgrounds for emotion, but also for sensation, whether through art, through music, through journaling, having a sensation treasure box. This could be an interesting one where you could help students build a sensory awareness to explore different things, see what is soothing to them, but see also what is triggering to them, and to explore that. Things like drawing the music, draw the music activity can help them to discover their rhythm, what triggers them in their rhythm, and for them to explore intensity. What does that mean to feel things intensely or less intensely? An example like the gingerbread person activity or the sensory body map, this could help them to notice and to name their sensations in their bodies. A similar one is to draw the shape of your feelings or a poem about your feelings. So noticing and naming your emotions. All of these, by the way, are in the Inside Out Handbook. And having stories and role playing can also help. They're one step removed and they're more exploratory in nature. I mentioned the individual bin before. And so tier 3 students benefit from having a bin that they could use in the classroom, that they could bring with them in alternative spaces. And in that bin, you could have sensory materials, you can have fine motor activities, you can have journaling, books, you could have all sorts of things. And you could have academic things in there too, but they need to be academic things that are non-triggering and that the student can easily do on their own. And so this is the individual bin. With the bin, I would recommend to create, especially for a student that oftentimes are dysregulated and need to have different outlets, that we create what we call a personal choice board. And so on that choice board, there's a lot of choice here, but I probably prefer more this one. And you can have cards that you can alternate and you can change, that the student gets to try out. When in preventative mode, they get to try out different tools, see which ones work and which ones don't. And the tools that work, they keep, and they get to put onto their personal choice board. And those can be changed on rotation from week to week or from month to month or whatever that is. And so again, I've got a link on the website to show you how to build the board, how to use the board, and things to consider. A nurturing support center, if your school doesn't have one, I invite you to go and take a look again at the link. I've got tons and tons of video capsules and documentation on that. In an alternative space, using emotional support tools. And so CBM has created one for K cycle 1, and we created one for cycle 2 and 3. So the emotions folder is more simplified version of the squawk box that I'll show in a second. So there's less emotions. We're focusing on what's not working for the student, what tools they could be using, and all of this can't be used when the student's upset. It has to be when the student is calm and receptive, and to be able to talk about different things. This is the squawk box, and so it's more sophisticated. There's many more emotions. There are many more tools and things that are not working. There's a folder that student can use with it that they can use independently when they know how to use it. And so again, you've got the links here on the website to go and take a look at how to use them, how to put them together, and so forth. I mentioned the emotions room. So the emotions room could be another alternative space where we bring the student, not for them to calm down, for them to let it out. And eventually the calming down will come naturally once the emotions have been released. And so we're providing materials in that space for them to be able to release those emotions. The emotion room, just like the nurturing support center, has to be introduced. It has to be modeled in how to use it. We have to try out what works, what doesn't. And some students don't do well with too many choices. You want to limit the choices for those kids, keep them maybe on a basket on the outside of the room, and they only get to bring 1 or 2 things inside the space. This is meant to be an inviting space. It is not meant to be used as a seclusion and isolation room, and so forth. And then in that space, there can be debriefing that happens. In that space, there could be different exploratory activities that could happen where we try to notice our bodies when we try things, trying out different rhythms, breathing exercises, sensory experiences, movement activities. All of that could be tried out in the sensory room. And so the sensory room, we don't just send kids there when they're upset. We want them to build a sense of rapport and safety with the space. They have to go there when they're in a calm state and feeling connected to the room. And so to keep that in mind. In terms of the transitions, my colleague Martin Demers had created this document. If you want to get a copy of it, you could get it here at the link. And we talk about during transitions, during recess and lunch, during daycare, school bus, and so forth, what are different options of support measures that we could put in place for a tier 3 student. And so one example that I've got in that document is the sheltered recess and lunch. Some students do not do well in a cafeteria. They don't do well in the schoolyard without structure. They need to have a smaller space, less sensory overload, where they're doing structured activities with a supervised adult. And so this could be something for a tier 3 student. Regardless of the different measures that we put in place, whether tier 1, 2, or 3, 3 different categories of elements need to be considered. Number 1, who is the student? Because if we're talking about a K4 student, or we're talking about a grade 6 student, if there's a history of trauma, if there's neurodiversity, all of that will make the difference in terms of how we're going to support that student. What are their needs and their challenges? In terms of the context, are we in a context where the student is in a group where there's many other kids with needs and that they're constantly triggered by their peers in the classroom? What is the environment looking like? Can we change the physical environment, the social environment? Are there things that we can help to minimize the triggering for that child? And of course, the adult response. Thinking about your CPI or your BMS training, making sure that we keep ourselves in check, making sure that when the child is dysregulated, that we don't add on to escalating them further. We want to be able to de-escalate them, that we remain reflective, not that we are reactive, that we work as a team, that we support each other. All of these are needed and necessary. Now let's review. We've covered a lot of material. It's been 2 hours that we've been doing this presentation. We had 3 different sections. We looked at the nature of emotions and the science around emotions. We looked at comparing social and emotional learning to nurturing emotional health and growth and in general. And then we looked at more specifically, what does that look like through the pyramid of intervention to nurture emotional health and growth? And so as a review, some key points to keep in mind. First of all, emotion seeks to be released and expressed. Suppressing those emotions may lead to serious repercussions on mental health and well-being. Emotions need to be felt in order to do their job and to be managed, because without that, this is not possible. Emotions require mixing to seek balance, not to remove that one emotion. It's not about cutting out the impulse, but rather about adding the tempering element. Although social emotional learning is based on emotion, it gives the precedent to reason. It is about teaching. It is an intellectual process. And some kids, don't do badly with that type of approach. But when we're thinking about our tier 3 kids that are very defended don't necessarily do well with an approach like that. They need to have something that is more experiential, something that is more safe, with something in the play mode, something that is more from the foundational up. And so, unfortunately, the SEL does not truly honor the natural laws of emotions, nor the steps towards emotional maturity, because we focus on self-regulation prematurely above and beyond expressing emotions, naming and feeling. And although nurturing emotional health and growth needs certain conditions, ultimately it's about letting nature do its job. And our role is not to do nature's job for them. It is to become a midwife to that process. And so I invite you to take a look at the website in general if you've never seen it before. We've got more webinars that are there and so forth of different themes. And the Resource Center has tons and tons of material. On the previous slides, I had a lot of other links there. There were links directly to that tool or that resource. But you can peruse the website. There are so many tools and resources there. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this very long 2-hour presentation. I hope that this spoke to you, and thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.